Welcome to another episode of Waves of Wisdom. On this episode, I have a very good friend of mine who is known as the empathy advocate. And she is originally from UK and now lives in Asia. Welcome to the show, Mimi Nicklin. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I am so happy we've finally done this.
Yes, we have been talking this for some time, and I'm glad that it is happening here in Maldives.
I'm one of your listeners. I think you've got 28 episodes already.
Yes.
So I'm very proud to be nearly on your 30th.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to have you because you have been also with our speakers community for some time, but it is your first trip to Maldives, and then we are doing it first time in Maldives as well. So Mimi, let's start with where you started your journey. How did you actually found your passion and what you are doing?
You know, Iyaz, today people ask me this question often, and it wasn't one that I had thought a huge amount about, to be honest, because I feel very much that this work, this passion was meant for me. So when people ask me, how did you find your purpose? I always say, well, I didn't. It came, it arrived. So I think more than finding it, I was open to it. So I believe greatly in the ability to connect the dots, to follow the signs. And, you know, when I've been here this last 4 days, every session I've done, and I've been very lucky. I've done some amazing sessions. I have spoken about you and I have said, I want to tell you that nearly 2 years ago, I met a gentleman named Iyaz. And I'm pretty sure that when I contacted you, you probably thought, oh, you know, here's another foreigner who wants to come to the Maldives.
But you came through with a good friend of both of us. So
that's true.
Yeah.
But I just had a great sense when I found you on LinkedIn at the very beginning. I feel like this man, you know, has a similar energy to me, has a similar focus. And that's how I've done it the whole time. I just follow the energy. I go where I feel I'm meant to be. I say yes to everything that I can, but I always say no bravely when I think the intentions are wrong.
Yeah.
And that has served me really well. It continues to serve me. I follow the people.
That's great. And you originally started your career in the advertising industry, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah. How did that happen?
Well, my father was an ad man. Did you ever watch Mad Men on Netflix? Have you ever seen that series?
And I think I'm not.
That's a new one for you to delve into.
Yes.
It's not new. I mean, it's an old show, right? But Mad Men is a Netflix series all around the advertising industry in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Its heyday, as it were. And that was my dad. That was my dad's life. He was, we're British, so I've been in Asia for nearly 20 years, but I grew up in the British countryside with a very British father, and he was an ad man, and he built Europe's first ever business-to-business marketing agency. That didn't exist before he had done that. And as a little girl, he was my hero, and I just watched this man and thought, I want to be like you. And so I set my sights on that from about 12 years old. I remember he used to take me to his office, which seemed so huge to a little 12-year-old girl. He had come from a writing background originally. He was actually Iyaz. He was what was used to be called a typesetter. And in the 60s and 70s, obviously before we had printing, proper digital printing, his job was to design fonts by hand, every letter, right? So the letter of the alphabet. So he came from a world of writing. And of course, today, my entire life is writing in some form. I've just finished my 4th book. And I just knew that I wanted to be like him. And unfortunately, he passed away last year, but I continue to want to be just like him. So that's how I got there.
So when you were working in advertising industry, I think you work in multiple countries. Which all countries did you work?
So I started in London, and then within about 4 years, they moved me to Hong Kong. And that's where this love affair with this region began. I did a couple of years there. Most of my career, I worked with either Procter & Gamble brands or GlaxoSmithKline brands. So big FMCG businesses, and I followed the job. So Hong Kong took me to South Africa. South Africa took me to Singapore. Singapore took me to Dubai. I spent a couple of years living in Colombo in Sri Lanka. Now I live in Kuala Lumpur. I've been there just about 3.5 years. And who knows, maybe Marley's next.
Yeah, almost, right? Yeah, you're most welcome. And so at which point you decided to leave the advertising industry and then go full into, how did you found this authorship and speaking and all these things?
Look, you know, the funny thing is, Iyaz, that I said I will never leave advertising because I had watched all my career women come in, get to their mid-30s and leave. And we had this exodus, the industry, and it still does. You know, of course, there are women that stay, but there are many women who, after children, it's just too much. You know, the advertising industry literally never stops. You know, you never work an 8-hour day in advertising. And so I was completely convinced I would never leave. But in 2018, I moved to Dubai and I took over a big American agency business, their Middle East regional office. And let's just say the business wasn't quite as I expected when I arrived in Dubai to run that. And I was very overwhelmed at the time by taking over that business. It was and the honest truth was I didn't have the training. I didn't have the training to run what was fundamentally an SME. I had been trained in big corporate advertising. You know, these clients are paying, tens of millions of dollars in fees a year. And suddenly I'm running a very small business with a group of people I've never met in a country that I've never been to. I have a habit of going to countries I've never been to. So that's when this work really found me. I went to see a business coach. I know you're a big believer in coaching. This phenomenal woman was asking me about my leadership style and how I was going to lead through this experience. And she asked me a question, which in the end changed my life, because she said, are you sure that you're leading with intuition, which was what I thought I was leading with, or is it actually empathy? And I remember thinking, no, it's not. What's empathy? How can that possibly be relevant to anything? But I went away and I started to research empathy. I discovered something called the empathy deficit, which is the lack of human connection in our world. And as I said earlier, I just connected the dots from there. It didn't start like this, you know, with wonderful cameras and hosts. It started with me writing my first book alone in the pandemic. I'd never written a book. I didn't even know I wanted to write a book. I just was writing. And a belief that the world needs more of this. The world needs more empathy. And no one was talking about it, or very few people. So I started to write. And, I wrote every day on LinkedIn. LinkedIn was my favorite platform. I don't think anybody read it ever, but today they do. So I made up for it in the end.
Yeah, I have been following you also for a long time, actually,
Thank you.
on LinkedIn. And then I found it very interesting. And I think you started maybe at the right time, because the world... more people started talking about, especially about resilience during pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Even I myself went through as an executive level person who suddenly, because in Maldives came to a standstill. 90% of our economy depends on tourism, and then suddenly there was no flights coming in, flights going out, border is closed. So it was a hard time for us. So even I went into kind of what I already knew from my good friend Ritu Maharish, who has also been on this show previously. She's the author of Leaders Block. So she gave me a copy of this book, and which was lying on my shelf. And I started realizing that I am getting into a Leaders Block now. I need to read the book. So when I read the book, I understood, you know, even for example, sometimes they go into these phases emotionally, and sometimes men are sometimes more weaker than women. Intelligence. So I realized all these things, but then I started reading all these things about, and I realized a lot of people are talking about resilience, and suddenly a lot of leaders I have seen who has never asked employees even how you're doing has started really calling up and checking on them every day, and you know, things like that. So I think that is a pivotal turning point in the entire global corporate ecosystem.
I think so. And I think that that was probably the snowball that started, because we were forced. We were forced to reassess our relationships, our mental health, resilience. But also we were forced to face the reality, which is that we actually have no control, or very little control, over our lives. And that was really hard for the world. I think that was really hard for everybody, right? To realize that you think you're the master of your own destiny. Until the government of your country tells you that you're not allowed to open your front door. And then you realize very quickly, you know, how small we are in this huge world of ours. So it certainly shifted things. Having said that, I think in my space around empathy and, I guess, emotional intelligence, that conversation is only now, I would say, in 2025. Now it's rising. So when we talk about, obviously, being unretirable, planning for your future, it has taken and will continue to take a huge amount of patience from me. I don't rush. I think the world is so fast, Iyaz. Everybody is obsessed with doing it now. It must be done tomorrow. I must scale. I must grow. I must win. But it doesn't happen like that, right? We're people. Relationships take time. I mean, it took you and I nearly 2 years to get me here, right?
Yeah.
So, I think 2020 started that awareness, and now there is a tipping point, particularly, I'm very proud to say, particularly in parts of Southeast and South Asia, where many of these discussions have been taboo and ignored for a very long time, certainly around mental health. But even in countries like Sri Lanka, your neighbor, where I do lots of work, I noticed a huge shift in April this year. I happen to be there in April, but even from the end of last year, discussions around emotional intelligence, vulnerability, resilience, emotional intelligence in the workforce. They weren't there. And suddenly this year, I noticed across corporate Sri Lanka, there are well-being initiatives and employee engagement initiatives and empathetic leadership programs and listening-led organizational change from nowhere. So it was bubbling.
So
now it's changing.
So what made that shift come? Is it AI has actually, because last couple of years, actually, people started using more AI. So people maybe thought, okay, if we are not human anymore, and then if we don't become more human, then the AI and the machines might take over everything. Because when everything is automated, the ultimate thing which we left is the human connection.
Yes.
Isn't it?
I think you and I know that. I don't think the corporate world has realized that yet.
Is it?
Yeah, I think, again, in my work, and I get obviously lots of opportunities to speak at conferences and that type of thing.
Yeah.
I don't think they're ready for that conversation yet, on the whole. Of course, there are a few, but I think corporate America, corporate world globally is still at the beginning of, oh my gosh, I must have AI. I don't think they've quite got to the point. Not yet. I think that shift is you said there, the human condition. I think it is just that the human has caught up with the reality. It takes time. Like you said, the conversation started in 2020. By 2025, 5 years later, we've left some of the trauma. We've stabilized on the whole. Most of our economies have, and some took much longer than others. I live in Malaysia. I think their lockdown was nearly 2.5 years. I mean,
Singapore was also.
I mean, for me, I think the most I did was maybe 5 weeks, in the countries I was in. So, it took some longer than others to kind of get back to life. And then, of course, after that, there's all that restabilizing, getting everybody back into the office or not, depending on the organization. And now the waters have calmed in the last 18 months. That's how long it's taken us. People are starting to say, maybe there's more to this than I thought. Maybe people really are lonely and disengaged. And the churn of employees is just impossible for anyone to keep up with. Nobody can keep their staff. I mean, the data shows us that here in Asia, as a region, only 23% of employees are engaged in their work.
Yeah.
I mean, that means nearly 80% of every business is just turning up and doing average and leaving. So the impact of that on our national GDP, on our economic growth as nations and as fellow nations, as a global economy, is huge. And it was this year at Davos, for the first time, that the World Economic Forum came out and mapped the critical skills for success and leadership by 2030. Of course, AI was number one, but not far below and in the top quadrant was empathy, active listening, and resilience. So it's changing, but it's taken a bit of time.
Yeah, it is so important. Even I didn't realize active listening is so important until I decided to do my ICF training a couple of years back. Actually, it opened up my eyes that actually listening is more important than actually speaking. Because we all are speakers, we thought the speaking is the most important thing. But the most important part of actually communication is listening, isn't it?
I think so. And I think also I had a conversation with our friend Shahab yesterday about this. We were talking about how AI is going to create even more content. And I feel we are already very overwhelmed with content. There is just so much, right? You open your Instagram, there is endless, right? And that's one platform amongst many. So the more people become comfortable with AI, the more that content is going to explode infinitely, because now everybody can do whatever they want, right? And I said to Shahab yesterday, he was talking about, I could use AI to read old blog posts and make new blog posts. And I said, you can, but so can I. As in, I can go and say, please read Shahab's old blog posts and make me new ones, right? So we don't need any original thought anymore, unfortunately. Somebody can take my entire book, and they're welcome to it, but someone can take my entire book, rewrite it, quote it, make it into a movie and put it online. So I think as that content increases and there's just so much out there, the ability to connect as people, authenticity will be more and more demanded. Listening, right? Being heard. Because there's just so much noise and it's exhausting for people. It's really tiring. So yes, I think listening will become more and more important. Genuine human connection.
I think also the social media, last couple of decades actually has taken away that human connection from us. And now people are starting realizing that, I think, because they are more distance, even though they are living together or they are they are in the same community. They are more distance than when we were children. We can make a difference of the relatives and the neighbors, and all houses doors are open for us, and we run around the neighborhood. But that's not there anymore,
it's
right?
not the case anymore,
unfortunately. So how empathy? When you talk about empathy, can you explain how somebody can really apply this in their life? Is there any framework or anything which you speaks about?
Yeah, I do. I do have a framework. I always joke that empathy shouldn't have a framework, but HR needs one, right? So
yeah, they are very.
They love HR people love a framework. So I did have to create one a couple of years ago. So I have a framework called ALUR. I try to stick to just one, and I use it everywhere. And it helps me whether I'm working with people in like a personal growth space or an organizational change space. It talks about authenticity. So the A is authenticity, the L is listening, the U is understanding, and the R is recognizing or recognition, right? Being able to respond to people. And that model I've learned in this work, we talked earlier about being open, connecting dots, and, this was not my world. I never did this work. So I've had to learn. Every day I learn how people understand things, how people learn, what people need from me. Just on the way here, when I was walking to your show, a lady wrote to me about a workshop I did last night, and she had enjoyed it. And I wrote back and I said, if you don't mind, could you tell me what it was that you liked? Because it's very hard for me still today when people give me glowing feedback to work out what is it that they liked, How do you use that? How do I do it again? So ALUR gives that structure. But, to your question where you said, what is it that people can do to, I don't know, embrace it or use it?
Yeah.
I think the first step is really around awareness. And most people don't know what empathy is, to be honest. So maybe we start there in that empathy is a skill set.
Yeah.
It sits in your prefrontal cortex, in your brain.
Yeah.
You are born with it. It's a skill that we use fundamentally to stay alive, to ensure the survival of the human race. Because as we saw in the pandemic, we don't do very well when we're alone. We need each other. Yeah. When we were tribal humans in jungles and small islands, hundreds of thousands of years ago, we knew instinctively that if somebody got separated from the tribe, either they died or we did. We knew that. We fought. There's examples in evolutionary history where they have found the remains of human bodies that they can tell were kept alive for a long time through the community. So, for example, they have found remains of humans who have healed femur bones in the legs. Yeah. So the femur bone is one of the hardest bones to fix, even in modern medicine. It takes a long time if you break your femur. And what they found in these human remains is that femur bones were healed. They had been broken and they had been healed, which would have taken in those days probably 3 months or more. So what they learned from that was for that human to have survived that, the tribe, the community would have had to keep them alive.
Yeah, because if they were going hunting and they fell down and broken it, they will die there.
They would have died there.
They would have become food for animals.
Nobody had, Uber Eats to bring him dinner. So somebody was feeding him and keeping him away from danger and keeping him warm or cool or whatever he needed, right, to survive. My point is that as humans, we have always been about each other. We have always done better in community. And yet today, 52% of us are lonely. Empathy is the skill set that enables you to overcome that loneliness, to lean into the world of another, not to agree. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it, but to understand where other people are coming from, to be able to build relationships, to be able to be in community with others. Very quickly, just to close off, there is a big difference between empathy and sympathy, which has probably been my number one question in the Maldives this weekend. So let's answer it for your listeners, which is that sympathy is pity, right? It's, I feel sorry for you. Something has happened and I feel sorry for Iyaz. Sympathy is a kind emotion, right? It's out of kindness, but it creates distance. Perhaps somebody loses somebody in their life and you send them flowers. And then you step away. I'm sorry. There's a gap there. Empathy is saying, help me understand how it's been. You close the gap. You are trying to understand. You are trying to gain human insight. So empathy is a skill set that anybody can use. Sympathy is an emotion.
Okay. Generally, before I started listening to some of your speeches and also reading a little bit more about empathy, generally, like a few years back, if somebody asked me what is empathy, I would say it is like being in the other person's shoes. And I think that is the general definition of what empathy is.
Yes.
So is there anything more than being in somebody's shoes and thinking from their perspective
I think
to
it's
empathy?
not, yes, about the more of the definition,
Yeah.
because you're correct that the definition is, I mean, I always talk about perspective taking,
Yeah.
but you're right. That is the same as standing in someone's shoes or looking through someone's eyes.
Yeah.
The idioms can change, but the
Yeah.
reality is the same. I think the power in empathy is the how, not the what. The what is correct, but the how you use it. Yesterday, I was doing some work with some defense ministers here in Mali. And one of the questions at the end of the session from a very senior person in that department was around, I had mentioned that we use, or not me personally, but us humans use empathy in conflict, in war zones. And that in the US Army handbook, before going to war, soldiers must be trained on empathy. There's 8 key facets that they must master before they go to a war zone.
Okay.
And empathy is one of them. And the senior leader here in the Maldives had asked me, but I don't understand that, Mimi. Like, help me make sense of that, because you go to war to destroy people, to destroy an enemy, right? In most cases, where on earth does empathy fit? You know, where does perspective taking fit in that? And what I said to her, to this leader was, first of all, the Americans wouldn't be teaching their soldiers this skill set to lose war. They want to win, right? They're the Americans. They always want to win. But everybody wants to win when they go to war, right? So first of all, we're looking at this as a tactical and strategic skill set. There are no relationships in life, whether that's with your wife, your mother-in-law, your husband, your boss, a community in a war zone, that will not improve when there is higher levels of understanding between the two parties. And as I said earlier, you don't have to agree. In the worst cases of human behavior, you might use it to manipulate people. Yeah. I understand how this village works. It's easier for me to attack the village. But of course, in the majority of times, we're using that empathy as human data to build relationships, to improve negotiation. So anyone that is doing any level of negotiation in their business, whether that's with procurement teams or clients or customers, how do I know how to build this relationship between you and I? Overcoming conflict in the workplace, giving feedback. So reviews, feedback, improving performance. We talk a lot about inclusion today. Often that comes back to including women, but it could be including younger people in the organization, older, anybody. How can you include someone if you don't understand how they want to be included? So the power of empathy is in the how you use it to build relationships, drive motivation, and create social cohesion.
When you talk about young people and old people, the generational diversity, I think for the first time in history, like we are having like 5 generations or 6 generations working in one office, in one company. Yeah. All this time we have never experienced this, right? And also when the longevity increases, some countries doesn't have a retirement age. So people in 80s are working with people in 18. So how does in an environment like this empathy can be used, and why it is important to be empathetic leaders? So
that, I guess there's 2 parts of that. You're right about the generations. I have a client in Sri Lanka whose chairperson is still in the business in their late 80s, right? Granted, they're not doing a huge amount, but they're impacting culture because they're in the business. So yes, we have this unprecedented time of the old and the young partnering. Empathy is fundamentally the ability to connect them, because if you put an 80-year-old and an 18-year-old in a room or on a podcast, we should do that. We should run an experiment, right? They would have very little in common, not even.
In fact, yesterday I interviewed Baiba, who is
also
Gen Z,
too, right?
Early 20s.
So they don't even use the same language. They certainly didn't grow up in the same world. Their lens for that world is very different. And as humans, as part, again, back to our evolution, when we don't understand difference, it manifests as fear. And often, not just people in their 80s, I'm talking about leaders in their 50s or 60s or even 40s. Often men, not always, but often men, when they're being very honest with me off camera, they will tell me, I'm very scared to speak anymore, unless it's with my own people, right? People my age. So if I'm with my board of directors, which tends to be people like me in an age group of me, I know how to do that. I know how to handle it. But Mimi, I don't know how to speak to younger women in the workplace. I'm scared. I'm scared of saying the wrong thing. I'm scared of insinuating the wrong thing. I'm scared of associating with the wrong area of the business. And when we live in fear, and of course, this is not, fear of falling off a cliff. It's not debilitating fear, but it is fear that is consistent around us. Relationships collapse. You create distance. If I'm a bit scared of you, I'm going to make a little bit of gap, So we need empathy to be able to teach employees at the top and the bottom and the middle and everywhere else, because empathy is up and down and lateral, in all directions, how to listen to others. And I said to a group of Maldivians yesterday, don't expect to ever agree with them. They were talking about the very young Gen Zs in their business and what they want. I said, you don't have to agree. You just have to understand that for that group of young people, this job title change is very important. It doesn't matter that you don't think it's important because it's not for you. And it's like, Iyaz, you know, as I'm saying it, they're smiling and they're like, you're right. You know, we've only been thinking about this. We think it's a bit stupid, to be honest, Mimi. I said, that's fine. You can think it's stupid, but it's not stupid for them. So if it's not going to cost you anything and there's no risk to it, just do it. Give them what they want.
There's no harm in it, isn't it?
There's no harm, and it makes them happier. And of course, when they're happier, they work better and they resign less, you know?
Also, same with the flexible working and, you know, all these things, they like, the new generations, they like it a lot.
Yes.
You're right.
So I think really we're talking about, as I said, perspective taking, leaning in, but it takes practice. Listening is a skill set. And like any skill set, the more you practice, the more permanent it becomes. And it takes intention. You know, I always say to people, you can't make them do anything. In the absence of power, power would be the only time. There are 6 types of power that we have. In any form of a consistent power, people will perform to some level. If there is a threat, people will do what you ask, whether that's a corporate culture that is led by power, or it's a risk in life, or it's a political power. But in the absence of power, in any normal environment, you cannot force someone to be anything other than who they are, because that's their choice. So to understand, to be a more empathetic leader, I call it a listening-led leader, that's your choice. You have to have the intention to listen. You have to want to listen. You have to want to understand. And again, always remember, you don't have to agree.
This is, how can we use empathy? Listening is the most important skill, right? When it comes to embracing empathy. Is there anything like, for example, responding to somebody who is talking, or how you respond to people? Or is there any other communication skills which we can actually use to understand other people more and to become more empathetic?
There are many. One that I would pick up on, because you talked about responding, is the concept of acknowledgement over action. And again, some Maldivian leaders told me this just yesterday. They said, you know, we feel like as leaders, we are meant to fix. That's what we've been taught. Perhaps that's where that came from, the last generation that we learned under. You know, we grew up in an environment, the millennials I'm talking about, so this kind of generation, we grew up in an environment, on the whole, across the world, that was in hypergrowth. Not everywhere, of course, some countries were not, but the leadership style that came from that era, which we tend to follow today, which tends to come from the Americas and Europe, those industries had hypergrowth in that time. So the leadership principles that we're learning most of the time are coming from leaders who learnt within a hypergrowth environment. And that didn't leave a lot of time for any of these things, right? Listening, acknowledgement, responding. No time, because they were busy making millions of dollars. And what that has led to us as leaders today, and many of this, much of the leadership mindset is around action. You must fix. Your job is to fix. So when someone comes into your office to explain, you cut them off and say, don't worry, I know. Tell the client, do that, right? But the reality today, especially with the younger generation, but also across the millennials need this too from each other, is acknowledgement. You're a coach. You know this. You see this every day. People are so desperate to be heard. They will pay people to listen to them. Right? And the coaching industry is predicted to be worth, I think, $1 trillion by 2035, if I have that data right. So we need to be heard more than anything else. So from a leadership point of view, when we talk about these communication skill sets, one of them is recognition, the ability to acknowledge what someone is sharing with you without fixing it. And the amazing thing is, more often than not, they can fix it themselves. Right. The minute that's kind of out in the open, and I come to you, and let's pretend you're my boss, and I come and say, Iyaz, I'm very concerned because our lead client has changed the deadlines, and I need to deliver this entire program by next week Tuesday, and my voice is getting faster because I can't do it, Iyaz, and I don't know where the program's going to come from, and all the stuff's coming out, right? And I'm getting more and more stressed, and you're listening, and you're saying, Mimi, that sounds, I understand, that sounds very stressful. You're acknowledging me. By the end, the chances are I go, okay. All right, I'm going to come back to you. Let me go and have a look at it. I'll be back later. You literally did nothing. You didn't fix it for me. You didn't tell me how to do it. You acknowledged, you responded, you created the environment for me to be able to express all those thoughts. The chances are at the end, if you said to me, do you have an idea what to do next? I'd probably go, yes, let me go look at it. I'm going to come back. So acknowledgement is a superpower. and also really, really phenomenal with children. So I often think that leading and being a parent are more similar than we think. And these skill sets are very transferable. So being able to acknowledge your children, being able to show them recognition that their very difficult day at school really was very difficult. Of course, for us, we think you only lost your school bag. I'm going to get you another school bag, right? It's going to be fine. But for that little person, this was the biggest thing that happened today. So I would say acknowledgement is another one of those. There's many, but another one of those skill sets that is worth mastering.
So it is listening, acknowledgement,
understanding.
And understanding.
Yes, but I think that the last piece around that with the model is authenticity, which is the original A of ALUR, which fundamentally is about presence. And we touched earlier on the incredible amount of social content and just the incredible amount of fake.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, there is fake everywhere, both in AI, but also in human relationships. I travel alone and I get to go to lovely places around the world to work. And it's very easy for me to know who is genuine and who isn't. The honest truth is it doesn't really change my behavior towards them, right? I'm there to do work. I'm there to create empathy. And I will do that with anybody that's in the environment. But make no mistake, when I go home at night, I'm very clear on which of those people at that conference, for example, really meant what they said and which didn't. That's also a skill set, by the way, to be able to work that out. But authenticity too. And I think this comes back to what your podcast is about, right? This concept of being unretired.
Yes.
You have to live in your purpose. And the only way to do that is to authentically connect to it. If you are trying to live in somebody else's purpose or because someone else has told you you should start a finance blog because you're really good at finance, right? But actually your heart is in baking, right? You will do far better in your baking purpose than you will in your financial purpose because that wasn't yours. Somebody else gave it to you. So I think that authenticity, that ability to live in your joy is quite hard to find. But once you find it, protect it with everything you have.
I truly agree with it because I think even in my journey, I started as a finance person and now I found my passion in, for example, speaking and growing others and, helping with others. This is why after practicing as a chartered management accountant for so long, I went into becoming a professional speaker, doing the coaching certificates and stuff like that. It's always authenticity is very important, but how can somebody actually understand if the other person is authentic or not?
Their own passion. How can they understand if their own passion is authentic? Well, I would say that comes back to something that I teach called self-empathy, which is very rarely spoken about. We won't do a class on that now, but fundamentally it's the ability to understand yourself. And the reason I say that is I think that if you find a quiet moment and sit without the noise, without Instagram, without your phone, and actually reflect on how you feel. And sometimes it's really useful to really think how my body feels and to sit with it and think, do I feel alive? Do I feel in flow? Are things coming to me? Am I energized? Do I feel like I'm swimming through ocean or walking through mud? But you have to stop to do that. You won't be able to work it out between, airport lounges and your next meeting. So whether that's a speaker's retreat that you guys are organizing, or whether that's your morning walk or whatever it is, it's different for everyone. You have to find a way. For some people, that's alone. For some people, that might be through coaching or through support, through friendship, to work out what it feels like. And then I think The other thing, our mutual friend at the conference who was talking about abundance, right? Yeah. And the concept of abundance, which I think is hard for people to get their head around. Even for me, sometimes I really grapple with this. But there is a lot of truth and a lot of magic in being in flow, in believing that you are in the right place and visualizing that. And the amazing thing when I look at my own journey is that today, most things come to me. What I would say is very important to note on that is that I work extremely hard to continue that. So I think social media sometimes makes it look like, if I talk about myself, now she's in the Maldives, now she's in Bangkok. But it would take the Maldives, again, we mentioned this earlier, it took 2 years to get here. There was a lot of patience, there was a lot of emotion, there was a lot of investment, there's a lot that took me to get here. I could have let it go. Do you know, we could have had one call and I said, I'll wait for that gentleman Iyaz to call me. Probably you never would have, right? Because why would you? And then when I get into town, wherever I go, and I'm not glamorizing hustle culture. I know that's a big no-no, right? But the truth is, I really don't sleep. I very rarely eat for the 4 or 5 days I'm in town because I make sure that when I'm in the host country of someone else, that I give everything I have to those people for the time that I'm there. Does that then ripple into more purpose work? Yes, but it's really hard work. I love it.
This is exactly reminds me of one of my first episodes with our common friend, Jonathan Lowe.
Yes, John.
He talks about serving it forward.
Yes,
So I think you're a
beautiful.
great example. Whenever I see you organizing this, going to these events and things the last couple of days, it reminds me every time, she is a good example of serving it for.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, because I mean,
Yeah.
as I said, I love it. I am an
Yeah.
introverted extrovert,
Okay.
right?
What does that mean?
Well, I made it up. I
Okay.
made it up for
Okay.
me because I'll tell you why I made it up. Because everybody thinks that you're either an introvert or an extrovert. I'm both. So that's why I said I'm an introvert extrovert. I get my energy from people. So the reason I love to be in service of others is because I love to be with other people.
Yeah.
I love doing this. I love meeting people. It just makes me happy.
Yeah.
But when I'm not in that environment, I don't want to be in networking events and gala dinners. I want to go home. I want to be at home. You will have noticed probably when I come to big dinners, I'm very quiet. I don't want to be the center of attention. I don't want everybody to talk to me. Of course, if they want to take photos, I take the photos and then I step away. I don't want everybody to look at me. I don't want a special table or I don't want any of that. I just want to be quiet. I just want to be me, you know? So there's a huge amount of introversion that makes me feel safe. But by the definition, I get my energy from other people. So that's why I say I'm an introverted extrovert. But I think everybody has to find their own way and then stick with it, you know. And for me, that is turning up, being in service, as our friend John said, and then letting, back to the very beginning of our show, letting those dots connect and leaning into the ones that feel in purpose with you.
It's great. So you already mentioned about the work which I'm doing around unretirable.
Of it, by the way.
Yeah,
I love
thank
it.
you.
I love the concept.
Yeah, thank you. So how do you think your current purpose is like making the world more empathetic actually will lead you to become unretirable?
Well, first of all, I can't imagine retiring anyway from it ever.
Yeah.
Because this work it's not like an add-on to who I am. It is who I am.
Yeah.
So if you look at my Instagram or any of these things, there is no other version of me. There is just this. There is just Mimi. There is no on and off version. You know, even if I'm at home in my casual clothes, I'm still in this. This is who I am. I feel very grateful for that. So I think that it will create unretirability for me because this is not a 10-minute journey. It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
So will I be on stage at 80? I don't know, maybe I'll be on stage at 80. But I hope that this belief can ripple forwards for the rest of my life. I can't imagine ever not wanting to do this. I can't imagine ever not writing or sharing or creating a foundation. I don't know what I'll do in the future. Yeah. But I would really encourage your listeners to believe that when you trust your purpose, and that is also very hard, Iyaz, because we love to have all very important things, salaries and health insurance and all these things. There's never been a day when I have not believed this is the most important thing I could do. Is it the easiest? No. I really want to be clear on that, this last section of your show. This is really, really not easy. But is it worth it? And is it wonderful? And will it make you unretirable? Yes.
Wonderful. I think, yeah, it's such an important message that most of the people actually, when actually people think of retirement, they think of becoming financially independent. And a lot of times they don't think about the emotional things which are attached to retirement. Do you know anyone in your life, any good example you can think of, somebody who became really unretirable, somebody who was actually not unretirable and retired, and then what they went through?
I would say both. I think if we start with the second, I get approached today by a lot of men, professional men in their 50s, many, yes, mainly through LinkedIn. And what I see in those men is panic. They hide it very well, but I'm onto them. Panic because they have left their corporate role, but the idea of retirement is unfathomable to them. They don't want to, I mean, they're young. When you're in your 50s today, it's not like it used to be 50 years ago, right? 50s or 60s, the same with the gentlemen in their 60s, they have so much to give. They want to build foundations, build businesses and platforms and NGOs, and sometimes give back or write a book or become a speaker or, you know, when we look at even our MAPSA community, right? There's gentlemen in there who are in their 50s and 60s, ready to embrace what comes next. And I think more and more of these men and women, but there's just more men at the reality of the world today, know that if they fully retire, first of all, they will be bored immediately. And the minute that they lose that purpose, their bodies and their minds begin to deteriorate and slow down. And I certainly saw that in my own father years ago. On the other side, you asked me of somebody that comes to mind. Now, I didn't prepare for this question, but you know who popped into my mind when you said that was a lady named Jane Goodall. I'm pretty sure I said her surname right. She is an animal behavioralist fundamentally. She's done work with zoology all around the world. She's extremely famous, and I really hope I said her name right. She must be 85, and you will still see her on some of the world's biggest stages and events and award dues for her work with animals around the world. So she came to mind as soon as you asked the question. I don't even know her well. I don't follow her particularly, but she's an icon for that, a beacon for just following your passion forever.
Wonderful. Yeah, we see these two sides of the spectrum. Actually, this is the reason I started thinking about this topic, and very few people actually talk about this.
I do,
because all of us, we will get old. All the people will get old if they are alive to live for nearly 100 years in the future. With all these medical breakthroughs and everything, it is the longevity is becoming more. One of the main reasons is because of that. When I don't know how many people are actually thinking that they might live for like 90 years and what they might be doing, because most of our systems, corporate systems or social systems, are designed in such a way that people will retire in their 65. So still you have a good, at least another
25
years to give back. And so I think it's very important that people think of the importance of that. And I think also it comes to, again, like the passion, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you don't follow a passion, then you cannot be alive, isn't it?
I think, when you were talking, the other person that came to mind was Iyaz, who is the gentleman who also does the work with wildlife. He's not with the voice of BBC. He has many books and many movies to his name. Yeah, I believe he's in his 90s by now and still actively following that passion. And he's also proof that when you follow your passion, arguably it keeps you alive. And the last thing I'll say on that is in my new book, which comes out in November, and it's about longevity. So that's, I'm going to mention it just because you brought it up. Part of what I write about is something called the blue zones. Do you know what they are? Yes. So the blue zones, and for anybody listening, go and check them out. There's a documentary on Netflix, 6-part series, brilliant. The blue zones are the parts of the world where there are the highest number of centenarians, so people that live beyond 100. The gentleman that is behind this research mapped out all the reasons that they believe the people in the blue zones live as long as they do. There are a few, but they're not what we expect. They're not necessarily diet or activity. Those play a part for sure. There are certain ingredients, and movement, very important. But passion and connection, so we spoke a lot today about connectivity, are critical to our survival. So if you want to have a long, healthy, happy retirement, making sure that you have those two things alongside your healthy diet, your activity, your movement are critical. And what I know from my data as well is that lonely people statistically die 8 years earlier. So perhaps, Iyaz, the equation for unretirability, which is a new word I just made up for you, sits in that point between passion and connection. Food for thought anyway. For a Tuesday morning.
Thank you very much, Mimi. And it has been a wonderful chat and conversation. I think I would love to continue this even off the camera with you. I think this is a great work you're doing on longevity and how it connects with empathy. I think it will be really nice to look at. And I will recommend all my listeners to actually subscribe and buy your book. If there's any pre-order link or something, we will link it down. So as last word, you have actually, your dad is from a different culture, your mom is from a different culture, you have actually you're born British, but you have lived across Middle East, Asia, and different countries. From all these cultures and everything, what you have come to know, is there's one principle wisdom which you live your life by and which you like to share with our audience?
I think that culture is a very nuanced reality, but I would say that if you show respect and grace for the culture that you are in, and that's why I dress the way I do when I'm here, when I'm in the Gulf, I dress differently when I'm in India, Sri Lanka, America. When you embrace the culture of another with heart, with that grace to show up and say, I want to be part of you, I think you can embrace any culture. That would be my...
This is wonderful. And just to connect with that, with your speech at our Speakers Summit, which you mentioned, cultural empathy.
Yes.
I think that is what is it all about, right?
It's really important. I think, even at your conference, another lady came up to me and said, it's amazing that you know how to wear the headscarf and the abaya and that you do this. And she said, it just never would occur to me to do that. How did you think to do that? And I said, well, I didn't really think, I just feel. And that is a skill in this very fast, very stressful world that we can all embrace more often. Follow your heart, look around you, and then lean in to others. Show respect and do it with as much grace as you can possibly muster. And I think then belonging, inclusion, culture will absorb you.
For a wonderful way to end our podcast, Mimi. It's been absolute pleasure having you here. And then I would love to have you on some other occasion, maybe after you publish your book.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And for my viewers, this has been absolute wonderful nuggets when it comes to empathy, human connection, and also becoming unretirable. So as Mimi said, be more culturally empathetic, embrace others, look around yourself until we come back and observe. Thank you.